Imagine driving along a quiet road and suddenly seeing a train speeding toward you with no way to stop it. On one tragic evening in 2004, a small village in England witnessed a horrific crash when a car was left on the railway tracks. Was it just a random accident, or was it done on purpose? 7 lives were lost that night, and many questions still linger. What really caused the crash at Ufton Nervet? And how did this incident change rail safety in the UK forever? Stay with us as we uncover the full story behind this tragic event. Ufton Nervet is a small village in Berkshire, England, with a population of just 296 people as of 2011. It's situated around 11 kilometers southwest of Reading and 16 kilometers north of Basingstoke. The village is close to the Reading-Taunton rail line, which runs just 1.25 miles northeast. This double-track rail line, partially electrified and built between 1847 and 1906, connects Reading with the Bristol to Exeter and Penzance line. Trains on this line can reach speeds of up to 177 kilometers per hour and serve both regional and express passenger services. Train 1C92 was an intercity 125 high-speed train traveling from London Paddington to Plymouth. Introduced in 1976, the Intercity 125 is a diesel-powered express train made up of 2 Class 43 locomotives with passenger cars in between. The Class 43 is designed for high-speed travel, featuring one streamlined front and a flat rear, giving the train a unique look. Each locomotive weighs about 70 metric tons and can reach speeds of up to 200 kilometers per hour, which is how it got its name. By 2004, each Class 43 was powered by a 12-cylinder diesel engine, producing 2,280 horsepower. At the time of the crash, the train was running in reverse formation, with Class 43 number 43019, named City of Swansea, leading the train. On the day of the crash, the Intercity 125 train was made up of 8 passenger coaches, including a buffet car. These Mark III coaches, introduced in 1975, are 75 feet long and can reach speeds of up to 200 kilometers per hour. Each car is made of steel and weighs about 33.6 metric tons, except for the heavier buffet car, which weighs 36 metric tons. The train had a mix of first and second class coaches, with 2 of the second class cars labeled B1 and B2 in the accident report. The train carried about 180 passengers that day, much fewer than its full capacity. Its total length was 722 feet, and it weighed 425 metric tons. Mr. Drysdale was driving his third-generation Mazda 323 hatchback northbound on Ufton Lane toward the level crossing. This compact car is about 13.5 feet long and weighs just over 2,000 pounds. On November 6, 2004, at 6:03 p.m., the Intercity 125 train from London Paddington to Plymouth left Reading Station, just 1 minute behind schedule. By 6:11 p.m., the train was traveling at 160 kilometers per hour as it approached the Ufton Nervet level crossing, triggering the lights and barriers to close. It was a dark evening with overcast skies as the train sped through open fields. Suddenly, the driver noticed something shiny on the tracks. He pulled the throttle back to 0 and hit the emergency brakes, but it was already too late to prevent the inevitable collision. At 6:12 p.m., the train crashed into the parked Mazda, which had been left on the tracks with its handbrake applied, engine off, and lights out. The impact tore the small car apart and caused the front wheels of the train to derail. The train kept moving for another 311 feet before hitting a set of track points. This caused the train's front to veer sharply, leading to a complete derailment. As the train lost control, it plowed through the ballast, and the force caused the leading cars to overturn. The front locomotive and the first passenger car flipped onto their sides, sending rocks and debris flying through shattered windows and injuring passengers. The following cars zigzagged violently as they collided with each other, further adding to the chaos. Despite the severe derailment, most of the train cars didn't jackknife. Instead, they separated from each other, preventing a more catastrophic pileup. During the derailment, Coach F hit a detached bogie or wheel set from the car in front. This impact tore through the train car's wall and got stuck inside. The roof and side wall of the car collapsed due to the force, and the car rolled almost 240 degrees, bending sharply at the impact point before finally stopping. The last 3 cars and the rear locomotive also derailed, but they stayed mostly intact. By the end, 6 people, including Mr. Drysdale, had died, and 67 others were injured. Minutes before the crash, off-duty police officer Mr. Brazier arrived at the crossing and noticed a car sitting on the tracks. He rushed to a trackside emergency phone to alert the signal box, but his call came just seconds too late. The train collided with the car before any action could be taken. Realizing the severity of the situation, Brazier ran back to his car to call emergency services, using a nearby inn as a reference point. Grabbing a flashlight, he returned to the crossing, only to find the shattered remains of the car and Mr. Drysdale's body. He had seen bright red sparks flying into the night, but initially thought the train had continued its journey until he noticed small lights moving around in the distance. Rescue teams already responding to the tragic scene. As the train derailed and broke apart, its electrical system failed, leaving the entire wreckage in complete darkness. Survivors used glow sticks and cell phones to find their way in the pitch-black surroundings. Some of the uninjured and lightly injured passengers managed to break windows, climbing out to help others escape. Meanwhile, Mr. Brazier made his way to the scene with a stronger flashlight borrowed from a passerby. He stayed on the phone with emergency services, providing crucial information about the situation, until he finally reached the wreckage and ended the call, knowing help was on the way. The train's conductor, who only suffered minor injuries, managed to make his way back to the crossing to report the crash and stop any further trains from approaching. When the emergency phone didn't work, he used his mobile to call his superiors, only to learn that the line had already been closed. Over 20 ambulances, 14 fire trucks, and numerous police cars rushed to the scene, bringing some order to the chaos. Survivors who could walk were taken to a nearby inn, about 300 meters from the crash site. There they were assessed and either transported by ambulance or by car, depending on the severity of their injuries. Some received immediate treatment on site before being moved. Within hours, all passengers were rescued and the site was handed over to investigators. At first, it seemed like a straightforward case. The train derailed after hitting debris from the car on the tracks. But things didn't add up as investigators examined the scene more closely. The concrete tiles and metal rails at the crossing showed no signs of the train's wheels being forced upwards by the debris. The leading axle of the train also lacked the typical damage expected from hitting an object on the tracks. The axle's gearbox was so worn down from scraping along the rails and ballast that it didn't reveal any clear clues either. Perplexed by these findings, the investigators decided to collect and piece together as much of the shattered Mazda as they could. They even asked Mr. Brazier to revisit the scene to help determine the car's exact position at the moment of impact. As they examined the wreckage, a peculiar detail caught their attention. The car's engine was split apart. The main block, camshaft, and crankshaft were all found in different locations, scattered far from each other and the rest of the car. One large piece of the engine, about 18 by 30 by 43 centimeters in size, was found much further down the line than the rest of the wreckage, raising more questions about the force and nature of the collision. Investigators realized that something must have lifted the entire train axle, not just one wheel. When they reconstructed the final moments before the crash, they found that the position of the car's engine lined up almost perfectly with the train's front axle gearbox. It was estimated that around 30 tons of lifting force would have been needed to push the axle off the tracks, and the engine block was the only part of the car heavy enough to do that. As the engine got wedged under the gearbox, it caused the front axle to lift and rotate slightly to the left. This off-center lift led to the train veering off course and derailing. If the engine had been wedged directly under the center of the axle, the train might have stayed more aligned with the tracks and passed the points beyond the crossing with less severe consequences. But with such a complex sequence of events, it's impossible to say for sure how things could have turned out differently. During the main investigation, 2 smaller issues were also resolved. First, investigators confirmed that the emergency phone the conductor tried to use wasn't faulty due to reliability issues. Instead, The train's wheels had cut the phone wires during the derailment, making it unusable. Second, several survivors reported that the emergency hammers meant for breaking windows had failed, shattering themselves instead. Testing with identical hammers showed that, if struck with enough force or used on a rigid surface like the metal window frame, the hammers could easily break. Out of 10 hammers tested, 3 broke when volunteers deliberately hit a metal plate. One hammer, which had been stored in a freezer, broke more easily due to being cold but was excluded from the final results. It was also discovered that the hammers were originally designed for 4 to 5 millimeter thick glass panes, while the train's windows consisted of 2 6 millimeter thick panes, making it harder for the hammers to work effectively. As a result, First Great Western, the train's operator, was advised to consider design improvements for emergency hammers to ensure they could safely break the thicker windows in case of an emergency. Since the cause of the accident was determined to be Mr. Drysdale's suicide, there were no legal actions taken against anyone. However, in 2005, the Royal Humane Society awarded its bronze medal to 2 passengers, Mr. Kemsley and Mr. McPhee, for their bravery. During the aftermath of the crash, the 2 men found Miss Rossi and her young daughter, who had both been thrown from the train. Sadly, Miss Rossi died instantly, and despite their best efforts, they couldn't save her daughter either. Mr. Kemsley then located a clergyman among the passengers and asked him to perform last rites for the victims. The 9-year-old girl was the last person to pass away from the accident, bringing the total number of deaths to 7. Afterward, Mr. Kemsley and Mr. McPhee returned to the wreckage and helped rescue more passengers, which earned them recognition for their courageous actions during such a tragic event. The tragic crash at Ufton Nervet raised countless questions about rail safety, mental health, and the design of emergency equipment on trains. Although improvements have been made since that fateful night, some issues still remain. What do you think? Could this tragedy have been prevented, or were there too many factors at play? And what changes would you like to see to improve safety on railways today? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective and start a meaningful discussion around this devastating event.